Hi, I'm Paul Higgins and this is Paul Higgins Photography. So today we're going to talk about some Lomography experimental lenses that were released a few years ago. They're very cheap and extremely cheap at the moment, and I wanted to redo my review of them. So here it is. Hi, welcome. So a few years ago, or a couple of years ago, I did a video on these Lomography experimental lenses for Micro Four Thirds, and it was dreadful. People hated it. It had terrible audio. People didn't understand what I was talking about. I was moving around a lot, and basically it was a mess. So I thought I'd redo it. So here we go. The video is in two parts. The next part is I'll show you around what these lenses look like, how they function, what you do with them, and then the second part I'll give you some of my comments and thoughts and show you some pictures while I'm going through that. So that's what we're going to do. Just a word before we get going on this. Like a lot of adaptive lenses and other things, these lenses are dumb. They have no electrical contacts on them at the back. So basically what happens is that everything's manual. So there is no autofocus, there's no connection to the camera, you can't see what the shutter and aperture settings were for the shots that you were taking, but you can't tell what the aperture was. So I have a video on adaptive lenses which hopefully is better than the original one of these guys, so check that one out as well. If you have any questions, let me know in the comments. So here we go. So let's take a look at these Lomography experimental lenses. So there are three in the pack. There's a wide angle, there's a standard angle, and there is a third one which is a fisheye. All three of the lenses are very similar. They all have the same buttons on them and switches and things. They have, so I'll tick this one, which is, as you can see, the wide angle one. It's 12mm. So it has a lens cap, you can see. Around the outside it has the focal length, so the wide angle is 12mm. It's an f8. On the back, the cap is not that great. It's just it just pushes on and pulls off. It doesn't actually twist on, so it's not a proper lens cap at the back. You can see here where it says insert filter. There's a little slot where you can stick gels in, which is kind of interesting, and the gels are provided with the lens. Then, if I put this little cap back on so I don't make any fingerprints or anything, there are various controls around the outside of the lens. So, put it the right way up so you can see what I'm doing. So the first one switches between normal shutter release and brief, and what that means is there's a little lever here. So if I take this off, in the position normal, it'll open and close the shutter. Hopefully you can see that. It opens and closes the shutter. If I switch on to the B setting, that's brief. So when I pull the shutter it opens, when I let go it closes. So what you can do here is you can do multiple exposures with using the shutter release here without actually, what you would do is just open the shutter on the camera, leave it open, and then use this one. The final switch, which is a little interesting, is this T switch at the bottom. And what the T switch does, what you'll see is when I move it into its other position, it opens the shutter completely that's built into the camera, and this is locked now. So now what you do is you just use the shutter in your camera to breathe the shutter. One little word of warning with these guys: when you're using this T switch here, it feels like it's open, it's moved all the way. But if you look in the back here, you can actually see that the release mechanism has not moved all the way. You have to move it until there's a positive click, like that, and then it's in the position where you can use the shutter on your camera. So that one is the 12mm wide angle. This one's a standard lens, as you can see. Oops, I'll put it upside down. And this is a 24mm f8. And the final one, it just says it's a fisheye lens, which is kind of interesting. If I take the cap off so you can see what the actual lens itself says, hopefully you can see it says it's a fisheye lens, and it just has the angle of view, 160 degrees. It doesn't actually say what the focal length of the lens is. So that's a quick overview of these three little lenses.
Okay, so first off, I did some field of view tests, and what I compared these to was I used my regular 12 to 32 Lumix lens, and I set that on a tripod, on the camera of course, with the focal length set at 12 and at 24, and I took a couple of shots off our deck, and then I did the same thing with the two Lomography lenses, the 12, which is the wide angle, and the 24, which is the standard. Both seem quite accurate in their angle of view, so that was kind of cool. They do look very similar. The only thing that's the downside about this is when you compare the quality of the images taken with the Lumix 12 to 32 zoom lens and the Lomography ones, you can quite clearly see the difference in the quality of the lenses. There's a lot of distortion, and the middle seems to be in focus, but around the edges not so great. So that was the field of view test. Next, I took a look at the fisheye lens. Right, so what can I say about this fisheye lens? I actually kind of like it, actually. It's pretty good. The angle of view is very interesting. As you can see from the images, it's not very sharp, but that's a common comment that I'll be making with pretty much all three of these lenses. You get interesting effects. The focus, as I will mention on the lenses as well, was a bit of a nightmare on all of them. And it's okay for close-ish subjects, but if you get too far away, they tend to be out of focus, and you can twist the little focus ring as much as you want. Doesn't seem to make any difference. I actually had focus peaking switched on, and I'll cover this at the end in my final closing thoughts. But the focus peaking really did help a little bit, but when you twiddle the knobs, you didn't really see a whole lot of changes with the focusing. So the fisheye, it's fun, it's interesting, and I quite enjoyed using that. And actually I've used it a few times other than in these tests. I took it on the cruise with me. It was kind of fun to take like pictures of champagne glasses and the room number and things like that, and shots down the hallway on the ship. So quite interesting. Next I wanted to talk about the wide angle lens. So the wide angle lens, I did do a couple of multiple exposures, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, so you can see these in this collection of images that I'm showing. So the way you do that is you switch your camera to open the shutter, set the camera to the not the T setting, and set it to the B or the N setting, and then just use the shutter release on the camera a few times. So you got to mess around with exposures and things like that, but it was kind of fun. So there's a couple of shots of that, so it was kind of interesting. Remember, all three of the lenses have that function where you can do multiple exposures. Second, when I was looking at these pictures, actually they're pretty sharp in the middle. So I thought that was a bit of a surprise. I thought they'd be kind of soft everywhere, but they were quite sharp in the middle, some of them. So all in all, it performed okay, not too bad. But at the edges, you can kind of see that there are focusing issues, and you can also see there's quite a lot of distortion as you get farther out to the edges of the images. But overall, kind of meh, I suppose. And finally we come to the standard lens. So the standard lens again had that focusing problem where it's very difficult to actually see any discernible differences when you move the focusing ring on the lens. So yeah, not so great on that. Again, quite sharp in the middle, some of these pictures, especially the one of the Mayview plaque. That's actually, I thought was reasonably sharp. So kind of okay. Again, distortion and out of focus, blurry at the edges of the lens at the end, but you know, reasonably sharp in the middle. So that's really all I can say about the standard lens. Again, interesting. So, closing comments. And there are a lot of them. So overall, you know, they're okay. Would I take them to a wedding and use them professionally? No. Interesting to take out and take some little snaps and have a look at them and play around with. Really is all I could say for these lenses. So, as I mentioned in pretty much all the reviews, there's a lot of distortion, there's a lot of chromatic aberration, there's a lot of blurriness at the edges, distortion, you name it, they've got them. So they're okay, but you know, they're not professional lenses. But you also have to remember that they are at the moment $29, so that's not bad for 3 lenses. That's $10 each. So where would you get such a value? Next thing I wanted to mention was the focusing ring. Yeah, it doesn't seem to make any difference at all. So I did have focus peaking switched on, but it really didn't. When I was focusing, there really wasn't a lot of change with what was in focus and what wasn't, and what was showing highlights. Just a comment about focus peaking on manual lenses. You do have to define a button to switch manual focus peaking on, as you have to enable focus peaking and also define a button for it to be coming on and going off. Hopefully that made sense. There are a few videos out there about this, so check them out. Next thing to mention with all these manual lenses is that the in-body image stabilization does work with these, but you have to go in and actually set the focal length of the lenses before you start taking pictures with when you want to use IBIS. So that can be a little bit of something you have to remember. I did forget a couple of times and have to go in and then set it. So just be aware of that. Like I said, focusing doesn't matter. Soft at the edges. I think they're fun to buy just to try them out and have them around in case you, especially the fisheye. The fisheye I thought was kind of cool. The others kind of meh. Final comment, and I made this in the original video. The main use I found for these lenses was to see if I was a prime lens shooter or I like using zooms. And I tended to find that it's a bit fiddly with all these different lenses having to keep swapping them out. So I do like zoom, and I guess I'm lazy. I don't like walking around. So with a zoom lens you can stay in one place and zoom in and zoom out. But if you're a prime lens person, you have to walk around a lot more and change lenses and things like that. So I think in general they were quite useful for me being able to decide what I liked. Final conclusions: buy them, they're fun, don't take them too seriously, and for $29.95 you can't go wrong. Once again, this is Paul Higgins, and this is Paul Higgins Photography. Let's see how many ers I had to take out of this one. Take care, and I'll see you next time. Bye. About being whether I should be a blah 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 zoomer or not, and I need to cut some bits and pieces out of this.